And this was about I thought it'd be a good idea to kind of recap the elections that were held on Tuesday this week and some of the results, and not really specifically the ones across the country, although I'll talk about some of those. But I will mostly be talking about those actually, in part because, and this is just probably my fault, I'm looking at it wrong, but I don't really know how to interpret the local election results. But I'll talk about that for a second. So, for those who don't know, and I imagine most of you listening do know, in Pullman there had been the mayoral election. I think that was the main one that people were focused on since Mayor Glenn Johnson was retiring from the position of mayor that he has held for. I think it'll have been 20 years by the time his term finishes. So this is probably the most I've read it described sometimes as the most competitive mayoral race since 1999 or something like that. I'm not really sure. I don't know if there's a record. There must be a record somewhere, but I just haven't found it easy to access of all the Pullman mayoral elections and what percentages people voted for who, or anything like that. But I do know that at the moment, from what I had checked, according to KXLY, so I'm not wrong on this if this is anything incorrect. That Francis Benjamin has at the moment 54.4% of the vote, and 100% of the precincts are said to have been reporting. So I saw that Tuesday night, and I just kind of assumed, well, that means that he's won, I guess. If 100% of the precincts are reporting and he won by 54.4%. And most of that night when I checked the website somewhat infrequently, maybe every hour or so, probably a little bit longer than that. That is the space between when I would check. It seemed that for a while it said both him and Deb McNeil, who was the main opponent, had 0%. It said 0% of the precincts reporting. So that makes sense then that, all right, well, 0% of the vote has come in that they've counted, and they have no votes for anyone. So I thought at first when I read that 100% of the precincts reporting, okay, so Francis Benjamin won the election. But then I noticed that I went to his Facebook page, the campaign Facebook page, to check on this just to see if that meant that there had been a winner. I mean, I know that the candidate's Facebook page is not the official source of information for a news organization declaring the winner. But I noticed that he had said, quoting from something, he said, a third of all the ballots have been counted. And this was from, unless I'm misinterpreting something, yesterday, I believe. So I don't know. I don't know if this means that by 100% of the precincts they've been a third of the vote so far. I don't know. I don't know what any of that means. I think I'm just kind of too stupid to know what it means. So someone can interpret it, then that's good for them. But good luck to whoever wins, though. Being the mayor of the city. I mean, I could be wrong, but I mean, I would assume, I guess, that Francis Benjamin would be more likely to win, just because 54.5% is a pretty large margin, but I can't really speak for that, if we don't even know, if we aren't sure who's won yet. But anyway, so according to the national races, I thought I'd speak about this a little bit. There were 2 governor races on Tuesday. There are 3 scheduled for the years before presidential elections, which is what this year is, obviously. One of them being Louisiana, but Louisiana has a really weird system, I guess, where I believe, so they have the blanket primary in October, I believe is the term, where all the candidates run, and the top 2 are considered the main candidates for the general election. I think some states do that anyway, but they do it in October. But I guess they have a rule where if one candidate can get a straight-up majority of the vote, they're just declared the winner. I could be wrong. That might not be the system, but I noticed that, first of all, it would be very hard for anyone to get 50% of the vote at least, considering how many candidates there are. So I was expecting this race to go in November, but apparently there was a winner in October. I remember this from about a month ago, or a little less than a month ago maybe, that a Republican won the state. The Democrats had held the state for the last 8 years or so, which some might find weird considering how conservative Louisiana is. But I guess Louisiana seems to be a state where they alternate, it seems, every 8 or 4 years or so of the party controlling the governor's mansion. For example, I don't remember. Jeff Landry, I believe, is the name of the governor-elect. I'll double-check on that. But from what I can tell, John Bell Edwards, I do know that is the name of the current Democratic governor. And before that, I don't know the name of... Bobby Jindal was the governor before him, who was a Republican. And before that was a Democrat who served for 4 years. Jindal served for 8 years. So it just seems to alternate. There are some states I feel like that, for example, there are some states that maybe seem a certain way in terms of how they vote, but their governor races are a bit different. For example, Florida seems to have the reputation of a purple state in terms of it can go either way, Republican or Democrat. Nowadays, I don't think it could go Democrat. I mean, maybe again sometime soon, but obviously they vote for Republicans the majority of the time. But besides that, they've had a Republican governor since 1999. Apparently, the last Democrat to win an election was 94. So different states are just sometimes weird with who they'll elect and then at the same time who they'll vote for in presidential elections. But the other states are Kentucky and Mississippi. And Kentucky is a good example, actually, of a state like that because they have a Democrat who is the governor right now, and they were reelected last night. 2 nights ago. I'm sorry. And in Mississippi, the Republicans held Mississippi as well. And usually I don't talk about it on the show because it's boring. And last week I didn't have the time. Maybe I would have discussed it briefly if we had done the full show last week. But my prediction that I made honestly, I think a few months ago, I could be wrong, was that these would be the results. The Republicans would have a net pickup of one governor seat, which would be Louisiana. The other two governorships would stay where they are. This is not a big accomplishment. I'm pretty sure every major news outlet was predicting this for a while. I guess earlier on in the year, it looked like Kentucky could vote Republican, that it would be won back by them, which would be a bigger, more significant win for the Republicans, obviously, if they won back both governor seats that were being held by Democrats. But but despite the fact that overall in the cycle, the Democrats are the only thing that lost anything, it's kind of interesting because it seems more of a win for the Democrats, actually, and I'll go over why. But I guess apparently because Andy Beshear, the Democratic governor of Kentucky, was reelected by a relatively substantial margin of 5%, which might not sound like a lot, and it really isn't that much, when you think about it. But considering that it was a Democratic governor who won by, first of all, that's more than he was first elected by. I believe he was first elected by about 0.9%, which that's, I think, one reason why a lot of people early on predicted, if you had to guess, not based on polls, but just based on logic, why he would lose this race. Because usually the party in these off-year governor races that have the momentum, and I guess technically this was true this year, is the party outside of the White House. We have a Democratic president, so it would make sense for a Republican to win back, at least in governor elections, which seems to be a purple state and overall a pretty conservative state. But not only did that not happen, he won by a larger margin. And I guess in part that's because I've just heard that Beshear is a relatively popular governor anyway. Outside of the even though Democrats have a hard time winning in Kentucky. Kentucky has had 2 Republican senators for a long time now. But I guess Beshear is relatively well liked in Kentucky. I haven't seen any opinion polling on him yet. I haven't looked it up, but I guess that's what I hear about that. But not only did that happen, apparently the Republican governor of Mississippi, Tate Reeves, who was reelected, was not only reelected in a smaller margin than that, but he was reelected by 4.4%, which is that's not that far off from 5.5%, but when you put things into context, it's the smallest margin of victory for any governor since 1999, and the closest election won by a Republican in Mississippi since 1991. So I will say that while I predicted that both these guys would be reelected, I did not predict that the Democratic governor of Kentucky would be reelected by a larger margin than the Republican governor of Mississippi. That is shocking to me, honestly. I did not expect that. And the other interesting thing was Tate Reeves was reelected by a smaller margin than he was elected the first time in 2019. He was elected by a margin of 5.1% I had seen before. This time, I believe 100% of the vote has been counted. It's 4.4%. And again, it's not a massive drop-up when you take everything into context how, well, I predicted that it would be an election that was not, it was less than 10% the margin. If you asked me, I would have predicted 6, 7%. 4.4% is kind of a drop-off from those numbers. And it's not as if that means that Tate Reeves for the rest of his term has lost his legitimacy to have a mandate and govern the way he wants. That is just surprising to me. But anyway, aside from the governor races, there had been a good amount of ballot initiatives which if anything I was more paying closer attention to than the governor races. I just found those more interesting. The most publicized ones being in Ohio, with 2 that have been publicized a lot, which is kind of what makes it seem like it was a bigger win for the Democrats, the night in general, which is the initiative guaranteeing the right to an abortion and then a ballot initiative legalizing marijuana. The first one passed by 13.2% and the second by 14%. Now I'm just going to say there's going to be political disagreements on the first one, on abortion is a very hot topic issue. A lot of people have opinions on it, very strong opinions on it. But I think we can all agree the second one, legalizing marijuana, I don't have a problem with that one. I mean, we can all agree that one's pretty a big win for democracy. But I think that those victories, I think, are also surprising just because Ohio is a state where I list as an example. People call it a purple state. It really isn't anymore. It has a Democratic senator, sure, but it's had a Republican governor since 2011. 2018, the midterms were seen as the big chance to win back the governorship from the Republicans, since in that election, the Democrats had all the momentum in the governor races, and they lost there. I can't speak a lot to why that happened or if there was some sort of mistake in the statewide or even the National Democratic Party, but that was seen as the opportunity to win it back, and they lost. So I feel like people say Florida is lost to the Democrats at the moment. I think Ohio is more lost to the Democrats, if anything. I mean, I think they voted in 2020, if I remember, and this is just going on memory, Florida and Ohio were considered the two major swing states that some people projected might vote for Joe Biden. Florida was lost by, I believe, 3%. Ohio by something like 8%. I could be wrong on that. So 3% is within the margin of, that's just some elections, even when one candidate wins, not all the supposed swing states are going to vote for them. There are some that are going to vote for the other side, especially in pretty close elections like that one. Ohio voting for Trump by 8% kind of shows that it is just, at least in presidential elections, a conservative state. Florida is a state where I consider it maybe more of a purplish state, magenta-ish state, if you want to call it that can vote Democrat. Ohio is a state where it's a conservative state that has a Democratic senator. So I think that's kind of the reality of that. So seeing such a conservative state vote on those issues by such a high percent, I know that legalizing marijuana, I was not at all surprised that was approved by a higher margin than the one relating to abortion, because I feel like that's something where if you ask someone their political party and you already know where they probably stand on abortion, it's just such, I mean, it's obviously, if it's a 13.2% margin, there's a lot of people who wouldn't say that, but I feel like most places you go, if ask someone their political party, you already know their stance on that issue. Marijuana seems to be a thing where I think within 10 years, it'll just be a settled issue, and I feel like it will probably be legal nationwide. I feel like a lot of Republicans seem to be supporting that initiative, so I'm not surprised that that's the margin of victory. Well, I'm surprised that that's the margin, but I was not surprised at all that was the more approved issue. So that wasn't a surprise. It's just a surprise that either of them would vote that high on those issues. So that was pretty surprising to me. So I guess this was a relatively shorter segment. I just thought I would go over the results and not spend too much time on it, just talk a little bit about the general trends we're seeing. And that's, I guess, to wrap things up on this segment, what I'll do now. So for just, a few final thoughts, not really the best night for the Republicans, or at least sign for things to come. The Democrats improved on all fronts from 2019, except in Louisiana, which was expected for a while. And by the way, just as a side note, I checked, I looked it up for a second. Jeff Landry, that is the name of the governor-elect of Louisiana. I don't really know much about him, what he believes on the issues, where he stands. But I'm sure, I guess we'll find out if you follow the news sometime in the coming months. I believe he takes office in January of 2024, so we'll take a look at that then. But I think that it was not exactly the best sign for the Republicans. You kind of expect that when you're going into an election where you're obviously doing everything you can to win, and I would honestly say most Republicans think they're going to win, that it's probably not the best sign that this would happen, that they would definitely not be the winning party in most of these races. And I feel like the other thing is, I feel like the issue of abortion and where pro-choice, pro-life, whatever, I think it's really, if the midterms last year started this trend, this kind of solidifies it. I think it's an issue that kind of just needs to be forgotten about in terms of trying to campaign on it on the Republican side. I mean, I'm sorry to say to them, but it's never going to work out for them. I'm sorry. And this is someone who doesn't support that side of the issue. So I'm just saying, I'm sorry, but I think it's kind of shown there's probably never going to be it's not going to be a winning issue for the Republicans. There are other issues they can campaign on that maybe they would do. In fact, I'm sure they would do better on, and I don't even think that, frankly, I think it's a lesson they did kind of learn, because I don't remember, and I don't live in Kentucky or Mississippi or Louisiana. I mean, I'm broadcasting from Washington. You're all living in Washington. Clearly, I don't live in any of those states. I've never even been to any of those states. So I can't say how much that was a campaign issue. But anywhere that is a campaign issue, it's not going to end well on the Republican side. So I feel like it's something they're already trying to distance themselves from, and not necessarily that position. I don't think they're giving up that position in terms of they still have the same beliefs on that issue. But it's something where I feel like it's not going to be a major thing they campaign on, at least for a while again after this. And it not even saying it was for this election cycle, but this kind of solidifies it. But after saying all that, I don't want to seem like I'm saying that this is some sign that the Democrats have already won 2024. I've seen news organizations acting like this is, Joe Biden just got reelected from this. Here's the thing. I don't think this does not solve anything. This does not reelect anyone. This does not guarantee anything for how people are going to vote in 20. I mean, I will say that we're a year from the election, and we're less than a year from the election. At this point, it's kind of clear that there are some issues the American people have feelings on that are going to be that way in the election, and that's if those are big campaign issues, that's going to sway the way they vote. We saw that with the abortion issue. That's something where it's not like people just forgot about it from summer last year. So it's clear that there are some things that are just going to stay the same. But this doesn't. I don't think this proves anything in terms of who's going to win in the next election. And the results in 2022 didn't say that either. A lot of people acted like that. I couldn't believe, how many people were acting like when we were only not even officially halfway through Joe Biden's term, people saying that was, congratulations, he just got reelected. That's not at all what that is. It doesn't prove that. And I will say that it definitely helps those who are rooting for the Democrats going into 2024, knowing that we're a year out, and I feel like they have the momentum going into the election. I will say that. I feel like Democrats, and I don't even mean Joe Biden specifically, I mean Democrats in Congress have the momentum, but this doesn't prove that they're going to win. I mean, this doesn't prove that at all. And I know that I have seen some people point out there's been a trend of, since I believe it was 1999, I could be wrong on that, I believe it was 99, that the winner of every election in Kentucky, their party wins the election next year. That's kind of interesting, and I will say that seems to be maybe more of a trend that I can't say for sure if that's a trend in terms of it points to anything necessarily of how the election will go, but I will say that it is kind of interesting that in 2020 the Republican president wasn't reelected, and in 2019 the Republican governor of Kentucky was not reelected. I think that's a bit of an interesting thing to point out. And now in 2023, the Democratic governor of Kentucky was reelected. And I think it may be sort of an interesting trend, but it doesn't really prove anything for the election. I feel like the only way we're going to know for sure who's going to win the elections is after the election happens. I will say, though, the number one thing about that, the number one trend to take away from this, if you want to pinpoint a trend, is there are a lot of people who point out all the time, who run news articles that I'd say mostly even Republicans in Congress who say that Joe Biden won't and can't win the election next year. And a lot of times when they say that, they kind of emphasize they think that not necessarily even about him, but just Democratic policies are not going to win in the election. I mean, I will say this. I'm not saying that they're going to be wrong and that Republicans won't win in 2024. I'm not going to make any. I mean, it's way too far out to make any predictions about the election, but we're a year out. I mean, around this time is when I think in every election, with maybe a few exceptions, but every at least recent election I can think of where the president wasn't reelected, and I guess there aren't that many recent ones since the last one besides 2020 was 1992. So it has been a while since then, all things considered. It seems that the people who are against the president's policies, the incumbent party's policies, kind of make that clear by this point. And you can say that you think that it's happening, but there's not some inarguable evidence that people have made that decision at this point. Otherwise, I think you would have seen the Republicans pick up Kentucky at the very least. At the very least, you would have seen that. But, I guess it's just too early to tell. I guess all I would say is in terms of locally, I wish I could give you more concrete news or facts, whatever, but it's just too hard for me to wrap my head around exactly what has happened. And as for the national elections, a win for the Democrats, although I don't think anyone who's trying to make a victory lap around this as if this is some massive historic victory. You know, I don't think there's much of a historical precedent to point to prove that.